And it's my honor and pleasure tonight to introduce Dr. Michael Conforti, who will begin the session this season with his presentation, Touched by an Angel. Dr. Conforti is a world-renowned Jungian analyst and founder and director of the Assisi Institute. During a long and distinguished career, he has become a leader in the study of archetypal patterns that shape the human experience. I first heard about the Assisi Institute at the start of the pandemic, when the Institute sponsored 2 talks examining the psychological implications of the pandemic and our response to it. The first talk was entitled The Ravages of Denial, an archetypal and clinical response to COVID-19. The second talk was Who's at the Door? The promo materials for this talk featured a classic archetype, a somewhat terrifying image of the wolf from the fairy tale, The Three Little Pigs, lurking outside the house of one of those hapless pigs. Those lectures intrigued me for a couple of reasons. First, I wanted to hear the Jungian analysts, what Jungians had to say about our fear of the other and the coronavirus as the ultimate intruder, keeping us all inside our houses, fearing for our lives. Second, I wanted to hear what Dr. Conforti had to say about the pandemic as a threshold experience, since earlier in his career, he had written a book on the topic. Threshold experiences are something we can all relate to as we experience a pandemic that a year ago would have been unimaginable. And as we consider this inflection point, what this inflection point means for us as individuals and as community. Closer to home, we at St. Aidan's, as Peg said, are in the midst of our own threshold experience, given the recent retirement of our rector of 20+ years and our search for a new rector. Intrigued by these topics, I attended both lectures and was blown away. I started telling friends about the Assisi Institute, and together we attended several more lectures and ultimately decided that Dr. Conforti would be the perfect speaker to kick off our new season for the Center for Spiritual Deepening. Tonight, I'm thrilled to share Dr. Conforti with you. Whether you're a Jungian expert or a layperson, you will find his insights powerful. Dr. Conforti is a gifted speaker with a warm and engaging style and the ability to make complex concepts understandable through his use of rich imagery and anecdotes. You're in for a treat tonight. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Conforti to the Center for Spiritual Deepening.
Thank you, Kathy. It really is a beautiful introduction and touching, and I hope I can honor both your experience and intuition of what I can bring tonight. Thanks. As a way of a very brief introduction to how I got to this work and what it is I do, I'm from a big Italian family in Brooklyn, New York. We're from Sicily originally. And so it's a major part of my life and my cultural background. And it's influenced me in a lot of ways. I think one of the ways it's influenced me is having a sense of the old world, which you're going to hear throughout this talk today, the old tradition, the old world, not as much about contemporary influences. Obviously, you got to consider, but there's something powerful about the wisdom of the ages. The old ones sitting around the fire, the old ones making cheese, the old ones, making wine, and all that came before them. And I've been an analyst, as you said, for close to 40 years. I trained in New York. I began really young. I was like 26, 27 years old. I made my pilgrimage to Zurich when I was 19, only to find out I was way too young. I said, go home, go home, do a young talk, get on a young bus and get a young t-shirt, get a young hat, all those great things tourists do. And he said, but you come back when you're older. And I came back when I was older, but into New York where I'm from. I trained in New York. And I can tell you that it was a piece of destiny that began when I was young, and it continues to this day. I still love this work. I'm old. I'm much older right now. It's hard to believe I'll be 70 in 2 years. And, I'm really more in love with this work than I've ever been. And hopefully I can share some of what it is about it that has enthralled me and captivated my attention and my interest for all these years. And, speaking to a group that's involved in spiritual enrichment, spiritual discovery is a gift and a challenge. Because with spirituality also comes the shadow. And actually, I was talking to somebody, I think one of our Russian students today, about the idea of heaven and hell. And they talk about, why did we have a heaven up here and then a hell down here, or wherever they're located, and then a God and then the devil. And we talked about it. I said, in psychoanalytic thinking, it's because of splitting. You know, we can't live. If mommy's good one day, mommy's bad the next day. We say, well, mommy's all good and daddy's bad, or daddy, you know, whatever. We cannot live with putting these pieces together as heaven and hell, or good and bad. Anyway, to make it more simple and relevant, I said, you know, I've wrestled with that question for a long time. I grew up a strict Italian Roman Catholic in Brooklyn, New York, and I loved it. I'm still touched by it. Anyway, I said, you know, on some level, it makes sense that there's a heaven with a pantheon of deities that live in heaven. Who cleans the gates, who mops the floor, who prepares the meals, and the tradition about getting in, and who doesn't get in. They're gatekeepers. And the same with hell. There are people that fan the fires, keep the fires going. Not the Vestal Virgin, some other people that do these, maintain the fires. And there are many images we have of torture, of, in some ways Sartre is No Exit is somewhat a portrait of hell. And I thought a lot about it because in many ways, I think we do need two separate domains to express that there is a world. There's a pantheon, there's rituals, there's traditions that go with what we think of as heaven, the benevolence, beauty in life. I mean, the creative. I mean, well, look, let's be real. What's more beautiful than seeing the smile on your child's eyes, and knowing that you've helped make a good life with them, and you've done all you can. You took us off. You work hard to make your kids secure, and the home is theirs. Whatever. Whether it's a 1-bedroom studio or a 18,000 million square foot house, it's what we did for our kids, and hopefully more than that, it's the values we transmit to them. What's more agonizing than seeing those moments when one enters the domain of diavolo? In the introduction that Peg gave about the times we live in right now, we don't have to dig down to look at images of diabolical, images of hatred, violence, contempt, betrayals. And the reality is we have to live with that somehow. And somebody had a dream recently where they were making a vessel with clay. And they were trying to make it like a vase with a lid on top. And in reality, I asked them, can you do this? They said, well, you know what? When I made pottery and when I was young, I was never able to really make a pot like that. I wasn't able to, as you rise the clay, and I don't know what the official term is, but as you build the clay, get higher and higher, and you have to maintain symmetry and all that. She said, I was never able to do it. I said, yeah, we can't do it right now either as a culture. As a culture, we cannot create the vessel to hold this stuff because it's too powerful. So whether it's a pandemic, whether it's political, whether it's spiritual, I mean, there's so many assaults. And just so you know, I'm not making this political talk. I'm not going to go there. It's too loaded, too volatile. But as a psychological point, that's what I try to do. Without trying to be a psychologist, a lot of my work is trying to understand these eruptions, whether the emergence or eruption of benevolence, and say how is it? And I studied a lot about the Holocaust for almost 20 years now. How could there be benevolence in the Holocaust? How could there be benevolence and kindness among the prisoners? And how could there be such malicious stuff between people that have so much? And you look at this and see, Jung was really one of the first of all the analysts to talk about objective evil. That's why I'm introducing it this way, okay? He said, look, there's objective benevolence in the world, and the mothers and fathers and mothers and mothers and fathers and fathers, regardless of gender, stuff doesn't matter. There are people that love their children and would take a bullet for the kid in a heartbeat. And then there are people that wouldn't. And somehow we have to live with both. And then there are people that while the benevolence occurs and you do whatever to make the dinner for your friend in need or somebody that needs some money, you kind of silently put an envelope under the door, whatever we do, you lend a helping hand when they're not walking too steady. And again, then you make up some maybe excuse. Yeah, I don't feel good today. So you mind if I put my hand on it just so they don't feel bad, So whatever we do, those acts of benevolence, and that's part of life. However, as an analyst, you don't just deal with benevolence. Any theologian doesn't just deal with benevolence. And one of, you mentioned, Kathy, the talks I gave, the Ravages of Denial. I could tell you, after all these years of working, hopefully some of myself, all these years, and with individuals, denial rips us apart. The denial of what we are, of the consequence of our life and our actions. And that's why, at least when you ask the question, one of the questions I have is, how do we even broaden our understanding of the spiritual life to include those contents that live in the unconscious, the contents that we want to just, push off, and we find some scapegoat, we find a sin eater, we find all the things we've had throughout history to expiate our guilt and expiate our sins. And we, as a Catholic kid, we spent every Saturday in the confessional, hour upon hour. They said, "You again?" "Yeah." "Same thing?" "Yeah." But I can't, 10 Hail Marys, 10 Our Fathers, don't do it again. I'll see you next week, Mike. It's part of life. It's part of what we do. And, the fact that since the beginning of time, we've had rituals of trying to find ways to either get rid of or live with these transgressions. It says transgressions are part of life. I mean, if we want to ever think for a second, transgressions are anomalous events, we're back to denial. I got the title. We're back to denial. Transgressions are part of life. And there are some transgressions that are in service of a better life. Some things we may have to do, say in war times or rough times, to steal and feed our kids. My father grew up, he was a child of immigrant parents. He's one of 11 kids in Brooklyn. They had nothing. They came over from Sicily, the family, and they did a lot of things to survive. I'll leave it at that. A lot of things to survive. And only now that he's 104 would he talk a little bit about what he's done. And he said, "Something, but you never asked me. Don't ever ask me about this and this. Don't ever ask me how we survived the Depression. Don't ever ask me these questions." I said, "I promise." However, our actions and the consequence of our actions never go away. And I did a study years ago on images of mirrors and portraits. And a strange thing to say, kind of silly on one hand, but we're not born with a mirror on us or in us. We have to find a mirror. The infant's first mirror are hope to God, the loving eyes of a mother. And they know when a mother or the daddy, or again, whatever gender configuration is, those people love that child with everything they got. So they have that mirror. The other side, when you come into the world and you're not wanted, the first mirror is disappointment. The first mirror is a sense of being cast off. You're cast off from what might be the hope for love that a child has. So we live with this, and Freud really made a religion out of memory, and we all want to badmouth Freud. He did great things for his time. There's always going to be another person to hold the torch, but what he did for memory and forgetting was really quite brilliant. Okay. Memory is part of this talk tonight because we always remember. Like many of you, I remember Sunday dinners with 30 and 40 of our cousins and aunts and uncles here in Sicilian being spoken, the best food in the world, homemade wine, and sometimes a little too much wine came up from the basement. And as 5-year-old kids, we were able to mix the wine with the cocoa or the wine with the cream soda. It was just delicious, Incredible memories. And then you got to remember the other stuff too. You remember the transgressions of which we were victims, the transgressions at times of which we were the perpetrators. And when you look at images of mirrors and the image of the portraits, such as Dorian Gray, Oscar Wilde's portrait of Dorian Gray, I found that during the period when Oscar Wilde was writing, I forget what year it was, the 1890s or around that period, I think, they said the portrait was a familiar image to many artists to capture the sense of conscience. Not consciousness, but conscience. To remind us that we all have a conscience and all the stuff that we do is stored. Not like there's a tally show. Well, I know what you did last year, well, then you the other night, and then you, and it's not about that. There's something very deeply personal and deeply spiritual about being able to live with one's conscience and finding a way to shoulder what we've done in our life, the good and also not so good stuff. And I'm opening with this to make a point, because look, I'm sure like all of you, I have a very deep spot in my heart and soul for religion and for spirituality. And I know there's a difference. And as Jung talked about, the difference is that religion is an organized approach to spirituality. It sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. Spirituality is a direct encounter with the numinous and transcendent. It's a big difference. I mean, again, I grew up every Sunday after Saturday in the confessional, telling the priest all the things that happened during the week and Friday nights and all that kind of stuff. You know, then you go to mass and you receive communion. There's something different. I mean, I think we all know, whether I never pronounced it right, agape, when you have that sense of, being connected to everybody, a sense of universal peace. Even in troubled times like this, sometimes you just feel like, oh my God, something's right inside. Even acknowledging, and that's the thing, to acknowledge that there are these other parts. And the long and the short of this particular opening of this talk is what I've called the ravages of denial, because when we deny what we've done, whether we consciously push it away, which is what's called suppression. I'm not going to think about it. I'm not going to think about it. No. I've got my coin. I'm not going to think about it. I'm not going to think about the computer when I did those other things on the computer. Whatever we don't want to think about. That's called suppression. The other part is repression, which is when we obliterate the contents. However, they don't go away. And Eric Neumann, one of the great Jungians, he said, when the unconscious contents that we seek to get rid of are relegated to the forces of repression, it's like putting them through some kind of grinder, or like you ever make wine, you press it down, press it down. And then when it begins to emerge, you don't even recognize it because it's become so distorted. You don't even know what these things are when they begin to emerge. Whether it's the sense of having been a perpetrator, the sense of having been perpetrated against, or some combination of all that. And I've seen many, many wonderful people. I mean, wonderful, on every level, their hearts and their souls and their talents and resources on all levels get severely compromised when denial comes in. Denial is when you don't accept responsibility for either, again, where you've been made a victim by somebody, or where we've been a perpetrator. And look, we've all done things against the grain. We've all done things that have hurt others. That's part of life. Could it be that the model of spirituality is when one can suffer consciously? And that's what Jung said. He said, neurotic suffering is when you're always miserable. Oh my God, life is terrible. Oh my God, life is terrible. He said, but there's something very different when you consciously suffer the pain of what we've done. Now, look, we have many interesting models. When you work with Jungian psychology, or why you go to Jungian psychology, better put, is because there's a sense of the antique soul. And you tend to look at precedents. How did they make wine 100 years ago? How did they deal with transgressions? How going back and back and back. It's like, the cartoons, you follow the rope, and you follow the rope far enough, you end up in biblical times. And we have many biblical stories. I'm sure many of you are much more well-versed than I am. If you read the stories carefully, there are some very, very complicated twists in the stories. Twists that we have not thought about. You take the story of Abraham and Sarah and Isaac, a story that I know Elie Wiesel writes about it. He's not deceased. He wrote about it extensively. I've lectured about it for years. Did a lot of research on it. One of the great analysts, Robert Langs, wrote about it. Now, I'm saying this not to make it psychology, but to kind of set some orientational points here. Elie Wiesel asked the question, I wonder why, he says, why did God challenge him to take his son up the mountain and offer him as the next sacrifice? Now, I remember I read that from Elie Wiesel. If you don't know, I'm sorry. Elie Wiesel died about 2-3 years ago, was one of the, in my opinion, one of the greatest living spiritual leaders the world's ever seen. He was in Auschwitz at 13. He saw his family decimated. Eventually was taken in by the French because the French took a lot of the war orphans. And to honor what the French did for him and the war orphans, all of his books, I don't know if you know that, all of his books were written in French as an honoring. And then we married eventually. They were all translated into English and then probably how many other languages. And some of you probably remember from high school, the book Night. That was the first book he wrote after maintaining a 20-year silence. Well, in his autobiography, he asked the question again, well, why was Abraham challenged with this? Why would God ask him to take his son? Now we have a lot of, we have a lot of answers. We have a lot of answers, right? And in my lecture I gave the other day for our program, I quoted Einstein when Einstein said, it's not that our answers about the world are necessarily wrong, or not even good enough, because they're fine. Our questions aren't big enough. The questions we ask about our life and the world are not big enough. That's something I'll never forget, that he said that. So I think about, when Wiesel said, why? I wonder why Abraham was asked to do this. And as many of the Talmudic scholars would do, he went on to do a version of what the Christians call exegesis, when he did a commentary on the passages of Abraham and Isaac and Sarah. He said, do you know, for instance, that Abraham had a first son? I said, no, I don't know that. I think I missed that detail. He said, yeah, he had a son. The first son was Ishmael. Ishmael that he had with, I'm having a senior moment with, I forget her name right now, the domestic.
Hagar,
thank you. One of my colleagues taught me, just be gracious with a senior moment, So with Hagar, and so they had the child because the wife said, look, I know you want a child, we'll have it with this beautiful woman and whatever. And then eventually somehow, this 300-year-old couple, you guys, some of you talk about being older, you're nothing compared to Sarah and Abraham. They were like 500 years old each. and she got pregnant with Isaac. And she says to her husband, my good dear husband, I think you should really banish the other son. You know the backdrop to these stories? Anyway, so Abraham got on his knees and prayed to God. And God said, he said, look, my wife says I should banish my son to the wilderness, but he's my son, what do I do? And he said, listen to your wife. Some people suggest that God was a ventriloquist at that moment. That there may have been Sarah behind in the story. And he took Hagar and the child to the wilderness. And so Elie Wiesel has a very different take on the story. And again, I'm saying this as a modeling, again, as people that are involved in a spiritual life, which I understand all of you are in your own way, regardless of denomination. He said, could it be that when God came to Abraham a second time and said, don't tell your wife, which is another important piece, right? Take your son and go up the mountain and sacrifice him. If you love me, prove your love for me. And then Elie Wiesel reminds us that he already lost a son, gave a son away. And Wiesel says, part of his exegesis of the story, could it have been that God was testing Abraham? To say, God, I love you with all my heart. Take any body part you want. I will die for you for my love of you, but not my son. You see, we take symbols, and this is where Jung was at his best. In the early Jungians, and I hope I'm part of the tradition of people that care about images. Images are not random. Well, it's a son. I mean, of course, you give what you most love to give to God, right? And we all, look, I grew up with the story. I'm sure we all grew up with that story. And, it became one of the most powerful symbols of divine devotion. It took a Jewish scholar to ask a question. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not going right or wrong. I'm not interested in that right now. But what took me was I never even thought about asking the question, why Abraham? I never thought about it. Why would Abraham, of all the people out there, be asked to do this? This is not the case of infanticide. There's a different story. The kid's grown up. His kid's already maybe 13, 15, whatever years old, or 9 or 10, whatever. He's not an infant. And the fact that Sarah was not asked, from a psychological point of view, where was the feminine in the story? It's another rupture. It's another male rupture of the feminine. How the feminine was not included in what was believed to be a divine intervention. Could it be a divine intervention if the feminine is not included? Could it really be? It was another expression of masculine oppression. So anyway, when Wiesel writes about it, he asked the question, he said, could God have been tempting him to stand up and say, no, you can't have my son. You can kill me. I will kill myself to show my love for you. You have any body parts, anything you want. I will run off to the wilderness. I'll do whatever you want, Lord. But I'm not going to take my son as a sacrifice. Now, if you go back to your Latin roots, or Italian, sacrificare means to make sacred. Was it an act of making sacred? And it's interesting. Robert Lang, the really brilliant psychoanalyst, wrote years ago, he said, if you look at biblical times, the aggressor was rewarded. If you look at death anxiety, he said the one that would perpetrate the crimes was often the one that was rewarded and given the highest stations in life, not the victims, even when the victims were innocent as children. So anyway, there was a divine intervention by what? An angel. Thus the title of this talk tonight, The Angel. We tend to think of angels as, these wonderful figures with wings and, whatever, or angels from A Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart, right? I mean, that gets a little bit closer. A great Jungian analyst who passed away about 10 years ago, Dr. Yoram Kaufman, wrote about angels. And he said, angels are not really so much messengers. Like what was the guy's name in A Wonderful Life? Harold, whatever, the angel in the story. He said, but if you look at history, angels are those figures that articulate the domain that we live within. The angels are the ones that help us understand the experiences we're going through. And Kaufman went on to say, not only is the angel on Mount Moriah a powerful symbol of the archetypal image of angels to articulate and to help and to instruct, but he said, look at when Gabriel came to Mary as a perfect example of what angels do. And, when Gabriel said to Mary, he said, look, I've got a story for you. You're probably not going to believe this one, but, I know you're about 12, 13 years old, and this is your husband, and you're carrying a baby, and the baby's going to be the savior of the world, and that's what angels do. And that's why I talked about it this way in terms of the title of it, and I hope it's appropriate. An angel is the one that informs us about the nature of the life we are living. Read the book. If you want to read more about angels, go back and reread now from this perspective. Read about the angel on Mount Moriah when he appeared and stopped Abraham. Read about Raphael in the book of Tobit in the Bible. Reread this Gabriel as he comes to Mary. And the angel is often with an analyst or a lover or somebody very, very close to you says, honey, can we talk about what you're going through right now? Yes, this is X or Y. And this is a story. Yes, whatever the situation might be in your life. I know it's a very difficult decision right now, whatever it might be. But the angel helps us to understand. It describes the coordinates of the system. And I feel that was important as an opening for this talk. I know I don't have a lot of time, but I want to do my best to cover what I think are the essentials here. At least essential that I want to convey to your group, and I hope it's meaningful on some level. Von Franz, who was probably one of the greatest Jungian analysts of all time, Marie-Louise von Franz, she was interviewed once, and the interviewer said, Dr. von Franz, You're an analyst, you're a doctor, you work with, fairy tales. She said I would look at my bookcase. I'm talking about her, she's over there. You've analyzed 60,000 fairy tales in your life. You work with dreams for 50, 60 years. And you talk about God a lot. What is God? And she said, God is what brings you to your knees. Isn't it powerful? And he said, well, oh, so you mean it's all about benevolence and like being at Lourdes and being, it mentions St. Francis. I've been to CC Italy over 30 times. It's my second home, the CC Italy, with St. Francis and St. Clair. She said, it's not just a benevolence. What brings you to your knees could be that drug addict wanting to, this is classic, this is Van Frans, I'm citing her. It could be the drug addict that can't wait to put the needle back in their arm. It could be the person can't wait to take that $100 that the family saved up a week in a cookie jar and go back to the pool hall and bet it. Or it could be the person that can't wait to get on their knees and pray and thank God for what they have. Which really pushes us in many ways to ask, what is it that we believe is God? It's a huge, huge question. And I've threatened for years to write an article called If Only God Was Made of Teflon. Because remember John Gotti, the mafia boss? They call him the Teflon God, because nothing stuck. They couldn't get anything to stick on him. In other words, did you really do this? I didn't do that. And they couldn't get a crime to stick on him. It all slid off. We project a lot onto God. We project the benevolence. Look, I hope it's clear. Benevolence is part of a life experience. And we wouldn't be here, all of you taking your Monday nights here, if you didn't know and you weren't touched by something the numinous. There are a million things you could be doing in your night, Listening to somebody rattle on about this kind of material, somebody rattling on about what it's like having been a psychoanalyst for 40 years and what happens in the consulting room when you talk to people and you close the door, you close the windows, no phone, nothing. The people, you can't do virtually today, of course, but when somebody has the chance of really opening their heart and telling you what they've been living with, and then developing the skills to hear sotto voce, the undertones, the undervoice of what's really being expressed. Oh my God. And you realize what we worship many times are things that may be illusionary. For some it's money. For some it is that 50,000 square foot house. For others it may be some sense of being so holy with the denial of the dark. And I can tell you that, I'm sure this is nothing new for any of you, but to live a conscious life is incredibly demanding because it means we have to live with both the shadow aspects of what we've done and the other side, the benevolence and the creative and those moments when you thank God for what you have. I had a mentor for 40 years, 30 years. Whenever I give lectures like tonight, as I prepare myself, not only change my clothes, and I literally get on my knees and say, thank God for what he gave me. Took me under his wing for 30 years, and I would never be where I am today if it wasn't for him. I know that. I may have been another one of the Brooklyn Chinos and Dominics on the street delivering pizza. Who knows where I would have been? But it was benevolence. It was grace that he cared that much and saw something in me that nobody else saw, and helped me. And living a life with this type of spiritual understanding begins to shift how we live. I'm going to give you a little story. When I was probably 18 years old, I was in college in New York. I went to City University for the first 2 years, and I had to do an internship. And I went, some of you may remember this, and most of you East Coast people anyway, right? It was a place called Willowbrook State School. Geraldo Rivera made his big news by doing an expose on it. It was a school for severely disabled kids. I mean, the conditions were rancid. I was there when he just began to clean it up, but it's still all the residues of what he talked about. It was real. I don't want we don't need details. It was all real what he said about the squalor and the conditions kids lived in. And he was kids for me. I say kids, anywhere from 10 years old to 50 years old. Just kind of sit all day long and sit and sit. And one little boy, I'll never forget, I never even knew his name. I call him the boy who would be king. The boy who would be a king. And every day he sat for maybe 10, 12 hours a day, just like this, with his face against the wall, against the corner, just, you know, it wasn't davening like in the Jewish tradition. It wasn't orthodox. Maybe you saw that somewhere, but I don't think it was that. He was, you know, what had all the appearances of a severely autistic kid. That was his life. It's all he did until, this is during the summer when I was there, until they had a recess. And someone would blow the whistle, recess, and I guess the kid knew enough of what that meant. And all, with the help of all the staff, you know, holding their hands, because these are rough situations, they would take the kids out to the garden. And it was all enclosed, and they would let this little boy would just look and look. Can I? He couldn't talk, but they knew it meant, could I run to the garden? And he ran to the garden. He did the same thing every day. He went to the flower garden, he picked a bunch of flowers, and somehow made it into a crown. And he put it on his head. I swear to God, he was different. For that half hour, he wasn't a kid sitting in the corner in his own waste. Something happened to him. I don't know what it is. You know, whether it was the flowers, whether it was, no one will ever fully know. But what I do know is when he entered that domain of the garden, and then when he engaged with the flowers, he was transformed. Even for 20 or 30 minutes a day, he was transformed into somebody else. And I didn't know anything about Jung at that point. But even though, I grew up in a very traditional Italian home, symbols are part of our life and traditional. I know nothing about these kind of things. But I knew something happened to him. And I could say, you know, I've been studying field theory now for 40 years. I can say in some ways, it's the gift he gave me. For over 40, no, how old? 70? My God, not 40. Forget, it's my denial, right? Over 50 years ago. 50 years ago, we're watching that kid run to the garden and watch him, his eye. He wasn't a sick little boy at that moment. He wasn't a little kid who was playing with his own feces and all the horrible things that these poor kids do. He was a kid that was in the world for those 30 minutes. He was engaged. There was a spark in his eye. Who knows what infusion, but he was infused by something. And in many ways, that's what I've dedicated my life to try to understand what it is. And not only that, the other part of the corollary to that is what? What are those things that defuse those wonderful opportunities? What happened? What happened? You were doing great. You were moving. Things were going on in your life. Things were happening. What happened? Where'd it go? Where'd that spirit go that you were so on fire with? That joy of life, you know, balance, of course, with the other parts of life, I'm saying, with shadow, but where'd it go? So in addition to having the infusion, like this kid, I would say he literally walked into a field, something generative, a field of beauty, the colors, all that kind of stuff. Maybe it's mother. I don't know his story. I don't even want to know the whole story. But I do know that he was transformed. And I do know what happens, or I should say, I've seen many occasions where people are removed from that source. Like one friend I go fishing with a lot, a lovely guy, you know, 50-something years old, you know, lives home with his mom, never married, never really involved in a relationship. You call him up, hello, how are you, Mike? I said, man, you're a barrel of laughs. You know when he's infused, when he's drinking. He's an alcoholic. The only time, hey, Mike, how you doing? Let's go fishing tomorrow. Let's do it, whatever. And it's like, who's your twin brother? You know, when I was first being, but you know what I realized, and this is where Jung said about many addictions. You want to know where the addiction takes you. His addiction takes him into an animated world. It's not lasting, you know, we're not illusionary about it, but it takes him out, hello, how are you? Okay, fine. Oh my God, I didn't want to call him. I said, man, you got to have a bedside manner, man. I don't think anybody wants to call you up. You want to just kind of slit your throat after talking to you for 10 minutes. It's miserable. I wouldn't want to live in that skin. But again, you see my point? That there's some place he goes to where the part of life that is animated. Animated means with soul, anima, the inanimate world, the world that is animated by spirit. This is what the ancients knew. The world was animated. Well, that's the god of this. That's the goddess of that. That's this. The way we need to appropriate the, King Kong. All these things that they knew about the world. It was spirited. We've lost it. What was once spirit and the deities has now become policies and politics. But it's sad, and they become the new religion, whether you're Republican or Democrat. Anybody ever ask the question what archetypal properties these are? No, it's your affiliation. It's who you are. So look, the main point I'm hoping to bring here tonight, I'm just get a little bit blurry. It gets better in a second. I have a few more minutes to make a couple of closing comments. Is that the Jungian piece has drawn many, many people involved in spirituality to its fold since the beginning. In the beginning days of Jungian psychology, they were mostly theologians, people following a religious life, whether traditional religious life, orthodox religious life, or maybe the way all of you do in your own very personal way. Because they found what he was speaking about was about spirit. That there was something animating life that many times we either closed our door on, or other times we found ways to nurture it. And see, Jung, different from Freud, Jung's work was about nurturing the spirit. That's what he cared about. He wasn't so much a psychoanalyst in the sense of your mothers and your fathers and your sisters and your brother. I mean, that's all part of life, and that's all, we need to deal with that, but that wasn't his issue. And when you see that way of life, you realize, what are we doing? In the Red Book, many of you have heard of the Red Book. It's one of the major books he wrote. Before he died, he said, there is what's called the spirit of the times and the spirit of the depth. The spirit of the times is about consensual reality. What we do, we make a living, we age, things, all the things we do in life, which are somewhat meaningful. Spirit of the depth is when you follow your own creative diamonds. You say, what is the calling that I have? What's the calling? Not the calling that my mother, father said I should be this, I should do that. No, not because of your gender, not because of your religious orientation, but what is your soul calling for? And I'll give you one image from a dream a man had years ago, which was his dream, but it's a dream for humanity, I think. He dreamt when he was recently retired. He was a university professor, a wonderful, wonderful man. You just love being with him because it was so infectious. His quality of his love of life and learning, okay? It's beautiful. I couldn't wait for the sessions. Anyway, he had a dream because what he had done, he had retired from university. He was going to be moved to Vermont, where I was living back then. And everybody in Vermont's a carpenter. Well, everybody's Mr. Green Jeans for some reason. Why? Only God knows. Everyone gets a car. You come to Vermont, you cross the border, you get a carpenter belt and overalls. So here he is. He's like 72, 73 years old. And Vermont's got winters. I was there for 30 years. 30 below zero, 40 below zero, snow, you can't believe, ice. And he was going to work on roofs. And I said, okay, why? And he had people come from all over, we mentioned 20 countries for the CC. He had people come all over the world, come to the university he was teaching. Anyway. So he was giving all that up. Then he has a dream, okay? Again, one of these dreams you never forget. He dreamt that he found that there was wood underwater. And it was wood that had been bound with like a rope on both sides. On both ends, and it was delimbed and all that. And he said somehow in the dream he knew it had been underwater for many years, 50 years, 100 years, whatever. So he just knew it. He thought 50 years. And he thought, if I could only get that wood out of the water, I could burn it and put it in my wood stove and burn it. Because up in Vermont, everybody burns wood, which I still do. I love. I have a 100-year-old wood cook stove, and I cook in my stove. Anyway, he said I could, if it's good, most times wood underwater gets kind of, soft and punky and all that stuff. Not that good. But he said, if it's good, I'll burn it. And an incredible synchronicity happened in that 2 days before he presented that dream to me, I'm driving to work and I heard a radio show, like NPR, right? And it was an NPR radio show about what? Something I never heard of before. Wood that was found underwater. And by the way, he never heard the story. I asked him, he never heard the interview. And he never heard of wood underwater. Anyway, what they said was, to cut to the chase, they said wood that's stored underwater, that's humanly done like that, but bound and all that, and delimbed, was considered one of the most, one of the best ways to cure wood. So when the Vikings would do their sailing ships that would go across the ocean, some wood that was underwater, that they were curing it. We also come to find out the Stradivarius violins, what do you think the wood was when they got it? It's underwater. That's how they cured it. So I told him this. I said, did you hear the interview? He said, no, never heard it. I said, are you sure? Are you sure you never heard nothing? He said, never heard nothing. I said, let me tell you a story. So I told him this story. I said, this is an incredible dream. If you get that wood, first I said, what about 50 years? He said, that's when he developed his love of nature. And he loved nature, from astrology to astronomy to, the patterns in nature, whatever, okay? I said, if you're fortunate to get that wood up on land and you find it's good wood, you can put that in your wood stove? I don't think so. This wood is invaluable. As invaluable as the wood they use for Stradivarius. I'm saying in your life right now, you have an opportunity. You found something that's sacred, something that no one ever finds, something that's been curing in the unconscious for all these years, something that it's invaluable. The price of that wood alone, my God, it's a fortune. You could buy 1 million, you can have enough wood for 5,000 lifetimes by selling a little bit of that wood. You don't burn that wood, it's too valuable. I said, you are on the verge of burning something and misusing something of immense, immeasurable value. I said, don't do it, man. I said, you really should not give up to all this teaching. I said, you clearly you're a gifted teacher. He said, but I'm retired. I said, I know you're retired. Why don't you go to the community college and teach one course? He said, okay, just to humor you, right? I said, okay, humor me, whatever. He went there, so waited for the next semester, he offered the course, and no one knew who he was. So about 3 people showed up. The next week, 10 people, next week, and within a month, you know how many people? Hundreds of people for the class, because they knew what this guy had to offer. And he said, while we may never fully plumb the depth of that image, I think we understood, I think you were right, that I was on the verge of giving up something so special, so sacred, by giving up all the teaching, all this. And the dream showed, you see, in the dream, that's not the wood you put in a wood stove. It's like putting a Stradivarius in a wood stove and there's plenty of other wood around. No, you don't have to do it. You don't do that. Really? You want to get warm. You want to cook the pizza. Put the Stradivarius in the stove. Come on. If there's other resources, you don't need that. And I close with that to make the point that we live in 2 worlds simultaneously. All the ancestors taught us that. We have it in our tradition with godparents. When you go to baptize in many of the religious traditions, the parents are there to teach you about life and all the things to survive life. And the godparents are there to teach you about the spiritual life. They become the messengers, like the angels of a spiritual life. And it's meant to tell us that we live in both worlds. And, to be able to honor that is such a gift. To obliterate that is such a curse. And one of the reasons we obliterate that is because of denial mechanisms. One of the ways to get back to redemption and let that peace come back to life is have the courage to look in the mirror. For all of us. And I'm not excluding myself from this, please. We all got to look in the mirror and make some tough calls and tough observations. Dorian Gray wouldn't do it. He wouldn't look, and he wouldn't accept what he saw coming back to him. So that's where the gold is. The gold is being able to live with, both sets of parents, with keeping a foot in both worlds, and realizing to live in both worlds, there's a price. we pay. A price to be conscious of the life we've been living and the destiny we've been given. And hopefully you have a way of finding that destiny and the courage to live it out. You know, whether you're 20 years old or whether you're 80 or 100 years old is a destiny. And at the same time, then have the courage to look at, you know, watching my father, he's now really failing. He probably has very little time left. You know, can he really look at what he did? I would never ask him to because he can't. It's not his life. He can't do it. You come up tough in the streets, you do a lot of tough things in the streets. Things you don't want to ever talk about to people. And I've seen all this. I've seen the beauty of survival and the ravages of survival. And I hope in some ways what I've opened up here, I mean, to me, this is not about dark stuff. It's not about, oh, so somber. To me, it's both. You know, to me, hopefully you pop open a bottle of bubbly later and you can have a great night and have that pizza with anchovy, whatever you like on a pizza. I mean, I am. But it's weighty. It's weight. It's weight because we are asked to carry this destiny with us. And there are consequences of when we live it out and we accept it and we work with it, and consequences of saying, you know, I don't want to do that. I don't want that. So with that, I want to say thank you so much for the invitation. I know we have 2 other parts to this, question and answers, and I look forward to that. But it's an honor, Kathy and Lisa and Peg, to be invited to give this talk. And I hope it's something of what you're looking for. And I know I've covered, you know, all the different stories are not tangents. They're all connected to the center. They're all threads to this, what I believe is a center to the story, which is the need for a conscious life. And that's not the easiest, prettiest picture. It's a good picture, though. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So I feel pretty sure that we might have a question or two. What we want to do is to send people off into breakout rooms so that we can, when we've taken so much, we have found over time at the center that when we take in rich new things, that it just helps to sit with other people and process a little bit. But before we do that, we want to give people an opportunity, if they want to clarify something, ask a question that might help them to be ready to go into those breakout rooms. We want to give people a chance to do that. So the way we'll ask you to do that, just because there are a lot of us, is if you have a question for Dr. Conforti, if you'll put it in the chat box, then, and holler at us if that just is a technological thing that's not going to happen for you. But if you can put your questions in the chat, Russ Bradley is going to be keeping an eye on that, and he will share those questions with Dr. Conforti. And yeah, so I'll give you a minute to do that. And actually, what I'm wondering too, since we're going to head into, for those breakout rooms, we'll also give you some questions to consider. Oh, sorry, I'll tell you about that later because questions are coming in. I'm going to be quiet. Russ, go.
Okie doke. Our first question is from Mary Jane Guffey. Why is our destiny so mysterious to us?
You know, I don't know if you know the story about it from Plato. Plato, he had 2 terms intermixing. He intermixed 2 terms, destiny and pattern. Pretty incredible, right? Anyway, he said, destiny, the original story he said about destiny is that destiny comes down on a piece of paper. It's written on a piece of paper, okay? So you get a piece of paper and it's coming down to us from the heavens. Ooh, and it's all, your whole destiny's written there. You can look at words, and you're getting excited about reading it. But when it comes right next to you, all the writing disappears. And believe it or not, I had a patient that had that dream, that platonic dream of Plato's picture of it, and the guy never read Plato. He had the same exact dream. It's wild. Why it's so mysterious? Maybe because it needs to be discovered. Maybe because it needs to be discovered. And my mentor, Dr. Kaufman, he said at one point, if you look at the 4 events in your life that you'll never, ever, ever forget, like 40 of us, cousins and aunts and uncles having dinner together, I'll never forget it for as long as I live. He said those 4 events are really in the unfolding, perhaps the unfolding of your destiny and your fate, coming through the stories. Also, Christopher Whitman, a very renowned Jungian, now also deceased, said many times the trauma that we suffer in our life is the presentation of our destiny. Look at Elie Wiesel, 13 years old in the Holocaust. I'm not sure, it's not all bad. I mean, those are rough stories, but sometimes it's the unfolding of a destiny through the trauma you're forced to live. It's what you do with it then. So I think it's mysterious because I think it really needs to be discovered. And the thing is, it's not about making a destiny. I'm going to give myself a destiny. I'm going to be the chief. I'm going to be the cook. I'm going to be the doctor. I'm going to be the lecturer. Who knows what it's going to be? And that's where, again, I mean, all of you involved in spiritual life, hopefully it's about receptivity. So I think Mary Jane asked the question. Ultimately, I mean, what greater gift is destiny? You know, yes, having a family, which is probably number one, and our kids, we love, whatever, nephews or whatever. But being receptive. So I think what goes hand in hand with destiny is receptivity, and receptivity is a modeling for the spiritual life, isn't it? You know, every act of supplication is a honoring of something greater than us. You get on your hands and knees and say, please tell me. I want to worship. It's my prayer. Almost every spiritual act comes with some form of supplication. Not submission, but supplication. So it's a great question with the destiny. There was a second question there.
Yeah, actually, we've got a couple more, and they're very closely related. So I thought I would kind of give you both of the questions so that you could kind of encapsulate them both in your answer. From Danielle Gordon asked, what are the benefits of a conscious life versus the consequences of suppression and repression? And Toya asks, to live a conscious life is incredibly demanding. How do we manage the demands on us?
Okay. They are very similar. It's great. Number one, okay, in terms of the benefits and then the consequences, suppression, repression. Freud and Jung, okay? Freud said, we repeat what we don't want to remember. We repeat what we don't want to remember. Jung said, what we don't face consciously comes back to us as fate. I'm sorry, I'm hoarse today, I'm sorry. Jung then said, what we do not face consciously comes back to us as fate, F-A-T-E. What that means, and I came up with a term called the migration of forgotten contents. Okay, what they're all speaking about is all those things that we don't want to deal with. Guess what? Who's knocking on the door? That's part of the lecture I gave, Kathy. You know, who's knocking on the door? It's the contents that we've exiled. They're knocking on the door. And guess where you're going to find them? You don't need to look on the rocks. Look in your marriage. Look in your economy. Look in your home. Look at your friendships. Look at the way you live your life. And you say, my God, what do you go? I mean, how many people have been through maybe 2 marriages or more, whatever? You say, what am I, cursed? What the hell's going on? What's going on? And you realize a lot of it is, yes, the consequences of the trauma we live through, but also many times it's part of the consequence of our own repression and suppression. You don't walk from it. So the point here is our lives become severely compromised as a result of the ravages of denial, which is what suppression and repression do. The benefits of a conscious life, well, I think the flowers look more beautiful. You know, the roses look more beautiful. When you hold somebody in your arms, you say, my God, thank you. Thank you for the gift that maybe I can really know love in my life. Thank you. Maybe it doesn't have to be like Sisyphus pushing up and pushing the rock uphill all the time and coming back down. It doesn't ever stop. You want misery? When you feel shackled by the endless repetition, iteration of the same drama, this will make you desperate, make you want to do terrible things. And then if you find that moment, whether it's the joy in your life of work and maybe the painting, whatever it is that brings you joy, gardening and fertilizing, with maybe finding natural ways to, like I learned recently that Eggplants. Eggplants love salted water. 1 tablespoon salt to a liter of water. The best I've had in my life. You know what I mean? So, whatever it is that brings you that joy, or like I say, if you go home at night and you have that peace, oh my God. So yeah, I mean, the consequence of suppression and repression, there ain't no peace. There's no peace because it's always knocking on your door. And look, I just read between the lines, that's what I say with this piece. Just look at our leaders. Is it loving it? And look, I'm not the love doctor. Back, years ago, everybody's hugging and loving. That's not where I'm at. But is it love in their heart? What did Hitler do? Hitler was looking for racial purity. He was trying to extinguish his own impurities. He was trying to extinguish the inferior qualities in his own psyche. He made a religion out of it, resulting in the death of 18 million people. Now, not all is as severe as that, but make the point. In our own lives, I watched this one video recently where this young man said to the parents, "Hey, I'm ready to come out and whatever." And the mother said, "Well, you're leaving his home, will you? God doesn't want you here." And I thought, could you do this to your kid? And the father said, "Well, your mother believes that God doesn't like you this way or that way, so you got to leave." That's not love. It's all suppression. And this is the work of analysis, that you learn about this. You learn about the different mechanisms in the human psyche. This is what my life has been about for 40 years of study. It's not just mommy and daddies and sex and all. It's not the point. It's seeing how we deal with it, or even more poignant, how we don't deal with things. But the consequences. Okay, this is the second part of the way. To live a conscious life, this is Toya, is incredibly demanding. How do we manage the demands on us? Well, you know what? You better have things in your life that you really love and care about, because it is demanding. It's look at models, look at stories of people that did live this way, that tried to live a conscious life. And Jung said, well, it's not about happiness. It's not about joy and happiness. It's about meaning. And after a while, you find the people, everybody's so happy and all the great happiness, whatever. Really, anybody that's so damn happy, it's most times it's about denial, because it's not balanced. Yeah, so the other side, anybody sits around and they sit shiver the rest of their life, and their lives are miserable. Oh my God, it's not balanced. And there's something very different when you sit with somebody and you maybe have a drink, you talk, whatever your thing, your social thing is, right? And you sense that this person has looked at their life. I think there's an examined life there. There's something very different about it. And yeah, there are consequences. It's a heavier. I'll give you one more image. I'm sorry. I'll give you one quick image. And then I'll shut up, I promise. When Elie Wiesel, he almost died. He had a horrible accident one time. He was run over by a cab, which is sort of a sport in New York, by the way. It's a sport. Run over passenger. Anyway, he almost died. And after surgery, he woke up, and the doctor was just, oh God, pleased. He woke up. He said, "Doc, did I tell you the dream I had before surgery?" He said, "No." I'll make it real quick. He said, "I had a dream where I had an appointment with God. God was going to allow me to come to meet with him and ask all the questions I ever had for as long as they needed, a minute, hour, weeks, years, whatever." So in the dream, he gets up to walk, and anyway, the 2 angels came back. The angels grabbed him because he was unsteady on his feet, right? Then after he talked to God for what it may have been weeks, he gets up to leave. The angels grab him again, and one angel says, "He's different." And here's your answer to it, part of your answer. The other angel said, "Yeah, he's heavier because he's carrying something very heavy for humanity." So I'll leave you with that. And I see the move to breakout rooms. Okay.
So thank you again. Thank you. We have so much more to take into breakout rooms than we can ever manage, but it's good to have the opportunity to share a little bit with the people around us. So let me do a couple of things. The first thing I'm going to do is put into the chat box. We may already have enough things in our own minds that we want to bring to those conversations, but some questions from Michael if that helps you as you enter your groups. So you should have those questions. And then I'm going to go ahead and put us into groups, and it will, let's see, I'm going to do this again because as our numbers change, I know not everybody loves breakout groups and we understand that. So I'm going to keep us at about 3 or 4 people per room. And so what will happen in a moment is that that you will be whisked away into your breakout room. If anything strange happens there, if you have a question, if something's not right, there's a place to say, I need help, and that will summon me, and I'll come into your breakout room and find out what's going on. So just take some time to have your conversation. We'll try to give you, I'm gonna give it maybe 10 or 15 minutes. I might push us a little bit past 9, but I don't want to take away that conversation time from you. So, so we're gonna go ahead and do that. Anything for the good of the cause before I open rooms? Anything from my people that I'm forgetting to say?
Can I have a room with no carpet? I'm allergic to carpets.
Okay, give me just a quick minute. That's where the tech world and the other world meet. All right, so off we go. Just like magic.